So my name is William Dalrymple. I am Sophia Pattle Dalrymple's great grandson. And like her, I spent a lot of time shuttling backwards and forwards between India and London. And in my case, it's very easy to jump on a flight, as I will do on Friday, to Delhi. In her day, it used to take 6 months. And we've just been going through the timeline of all her adventures. And she seems to go back and forwards on ships to India throughout the 1840s and 50s. She's someone I grew up with. There was another portrait of her outside my parents' bedroom, and in a line of family portraits of rather dull, stolid Scottish landlords, the Pattles stood out as this extraordinary and rather unlikely moment of sort of artistic and bohemian brilliance and excitement. She was born, I think, in Chandanagar, possibly in Calcutta, but certainly in Bengal. She was one of 7 sisters, and she was the youngest and vied with her elder sister Virgie for being the most beautiful. Certainly she was one who a lot of people fell in love with. At one point Thackeray says he'd love to marry her. Burne-Jones does a love album to her. There are rather amorous letters from Rossetti, and she is the most painted of the sisters by Watts, and there are 6 or 7 paintings of her by Watts scattered around. And she had an extraordinary life. Born in Chandanagar, educated in Versailles, between Versailles and Paris, so presumably trilingual. English, French, and Bengali or Hindi. She goes back to Calcutta, where she marries my great-grandfather, who's a very handsome young cadet. At one point, before she gets married to him, she goes to a ball with her sister, and between them they get 16 proposals of marriage in one night. So one goes as day, one goes as night. So these were very glamorous sisters, which is interesting because they were Anglo-Indian, and this is the peak of British racism, just in the run-up to the 1857 uprising, what is sometimes called the Indian Mutiny. And a hint of Indian blood was not an asset for most people at this period. It was a problem. And there is a little bit of gossip in all the memoirs about Little Holland House about Eastern manners and Eastern mores and Eastern morality even. Some of the more stuffy visitors, such as George de Mauriers, talks about a slight stink of Eastern immorality or something, some sort of racist comment he makes. So these are girls who are known to be a little bit Indian. We know that Sophia had a great-grandmother, I think, who was Bengali, called Marie Monica, who married a Frenchman, and then that Frenchman's granddaughter marries a man called James Pattle. And James Pattle is a fantastic character who Virginia Woolf loved to write about. And he was called the biggest liar in India. He made a fortune importing ice from America, and was able to serve tip-top champagne in the middle of the Bengal summer, ice cold with the ice that he brought from Boston. The most famous story about him, which Virginia Woolf tells, is that when he died, he was so wicked, it was said, that the devil wouldn't let him leave India. And so he was put into a coffin, and he left instructions that he wanted to be buried in his family vault in London. And so he gets put in rum to preserve him during the voyage. But the ship doesn't arrive on time, and the coffin is sitting in his wife's bedroom when, due to the heat, he suddenly breaks out of the coffin and pops up and sits upright in his coffin, whereupon his wife dies too of shock, and the two of them are then put in rum and put into the hold of the ship. But because it's already exploded once, it smells of rum, and haven't even left the Hooghly when the sailors bore holes into the coffin and start to drink the rum, get drunk, crash into a sandbank, and a paraffin lamp hits the floor and the whole thing goes up in flames. And according to this story at least, Patel and his wife are cremated in the middle of the Hooghly River rather than reaching the vault in London. Whether that story is true or not, it's much told. And you get an idea of this sort of slightly sort of rackety background this lot come from. And I don't know what Victorian society in London would have made of girls that were a little bit Indian, that were brought up in Paris. Again, another place sort of associated vaguely with immorality by the more stolid Victorian Brits. And anyway, at one point she arrives back in London, and soon after she and her sister Sarah move into Little Holland House. And this is where a lot of Watts's paintings were painted. He had a studio there. He famously came to lunch and stayed 35 years. And the Seven Sisters worship him. And they go down on their knees and offer him food and drink. And they use him also as a social magnet, because at this point Watts is the great Victorian genius. He's England's Michelangelo. Everyone wants a bit of Watts. And these girls, who were ultimately outsiders, although Sarah Prinsep is married to a director of the East India Company, become an exotic appendage to London society. They live outside London. Little Holland House in Kensington is a village at that point, 5 miles outside London. And yet their Sunday lunches are these famous occasions when Dickens, Herschel, Tennyson, and all the luminaries of the day are invited. Joachim, who Brahms wrote his violin concerto for, plays the violin in the evening. And the main danger is being waylaid by Julie Margaret Cameron, another of the sisters, who makes all the the visitors to lunch dress up in tinsel and sit in a boat and be Tennyson is suddenly King Arthur, and a priest who's at lunch is Guinevere, not Guinevere, is Lancelot, and the serving lady or the cook is Guinevere. And the priest then turns out to be Cardinal Vaughan in a later incarnation. And when he says he shouldn't be in the photograph because he's a priest, he says, "I'll write to your Pope." So all this is going on, and it's all, fantastic contrast to everything else that's happening in mid-Victorian London, where everyone's, I think of Queen Victoria and her black busks and formality and everything. These girls are wearing Indian clothes. They're having affairs with the painters. All the young pre-Raphaelites are hovering around Watts and these sisters, together they provide a sort of spectacular package. The girls provide beauty and glamour, like sort of modern it girls, while Watts is the centre of artistic London. So, it's that wonderful mixture of art and beauty and sex that exist in all these moments in history when sort of great art and glamour come together. And which is why you have Rossetti painting Sophia, then Burne-Jones, who does a wonderful love album to her, and endlessly Watts. And all these painters gather around. The group of houses which survive, Little Holland House has been destroyed, the houses of the artists around there still survive. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin lives in a house, I can't remember which one of the pre-Raphaelites built it. And then Leighton House still survives, of course, with all its wonderful Persian tiles, built by Leighton, who's another of these artists clustering around this artist colony. And there's a sort of, there's a faintly comic element to it. They all go off patriotically into the artists' rifles and they try and drill, and Rossetti doesn't know how to load a bullet, and Burne-Jones can't clean the gun, and Millais has lost the cartridges, and then all the rest of it. It is a very comic sort of scene in many ways, mid-Victorian London, and yet it's a wonderful thing, and so un-English in a country which has done very little to glamorize and dignify art and artists, and in a period when the British were not known for their appreciation of the arts. Watts, Little Holland House and the Patel sisters provide a wonderful counterpoint to that. And in the photographs of Julie Margaret Cameron, we have a wonderful record of this world. There was an album at home when I was growing up of Julie Margaret's pictures in a scrapbook her sister put together. And so we have quite a lot of glimpses of this. Sketchbooks by Watts survive from this period, showing them all there. And they appear in every artistic and bohemian biography of the period. There are 20 or 30 memoirs which in different ways record what goes on at Little Holland House. And it's a wonderful moment in history. It's a very surprising moment. It's everything you don't expect from the Victorians. It's multicultural, it's artistic, it's glamorous, it's sexy.